We are here with the final in our ongoing series, talking with our blogging team. We look forward to this hopefully being kind of an ongoing annual tradition, just making sure we take some time with our writers and chatting with them and get to know them a little bit more and the themes of what they write about and kind of what brought them to Roompact. But we will start out as we always do. Justin, if you want to introduce yourself briefly, kind of your professional background, and then we will go from there.
Awesome. Well, hello. My name is Justin Mason. I currently work at Georgetown University, where I serve as an associate director of residential education. I've been in the field, I think I'm going on 11 years professionally now, within the whole context being residence life. So I've jumped between public schools, private schools, and I'm very excited to talk about this topic today because it's one I was introduced to when I was an undergraduate student.
Yeah. So the topic being kind of bringing a strength-based approach when it comes to residence life, and certainly there's a lot of different applications. So we'll kind of just follow where you lead us, Justin, of kind of the ways that you have either just kind of examined, the possibilities, or sort of had the first experience of implementing it. But just in case folks aren't aware, how would you define a strength-based approach when it comes to residence education?
Sure. And so to clarify, I am drawing from Gallup strengths. So a lot of people probably in their younger years, like when I was an undergraduate, it was called Strengths Finder, Strengths Quest. Now I think it's called CliftonStrengths. But we often see this. It's a test that folks will take. It's based off of positive psychology, where it tells you what you're naturally talented at. And so a lot of times I feel like what I see schools doing is they will have students take the test and then that's it. But I think to really apply it into residence education, it's really taking that information and putting people in the right spot. So when you know what someone's talented at, when you know what kind of like intrinsically motivates them, it's as a supervisor, as a manager, an educator, it's putting those people in places where they can thrive. Because a strengths based approach would say if you're able to do what you're naturally talented at, then you're going to be feeling a sense of alignment, a sense of purpose. And that's really what we want in residence education.
Yeah, I mean, I've like you said, like I've been familiar with it since, I was an undergraduate, and I think similar sort of timelines that we're working against here were like about 10 years ago or a little over that. Like it did the advent and kind of the popularity of this kind of approach, really hit the scene, and yeah, I mean, I've found any of these sort of like inventories and it gives you kind of just the 4 letter code of like your personality or whatever else, like if nothing else it just gives you that language to talk about, yeah, like these are the things I really enjoy or I'm really good at, or this is how I work with other people, like whatever it is. But like strengths is so unique in the sense of like it really is so heavily like emphasizes people's capabilities and like what they're good at and all that, versus it being like, well, you might like this or you might not like this or what, like. And that is also true. So like I don't think any of these is like, oh well, if you only use this then you'll be golden or whatever. It's like, but strengths is kind of set apart, and I think is maybe even kind of the starting point, maybe like because it is so affirming versus getting into like a lot more of the like messy complexity where like you might end up being like, cool, yeah, this definitely resonates with me, but I don't know necessarily like how to necessarily kind of go from there. But like you said, it's like this, you can definitely like position people to be uh doing work that they will thrive in, and I guess we'll just have the greatest impact. But um so I guess just to clarify too, I know that there's like uh you know I guess just like different levels of like certification, all that. Like, is that something that you've like pursued and kind of undertaken of like the
Yeah, so a majority of my experience has been through training, so RA training, and the school I was at prior, they organized a level 1 training, so we could help out with new student orientation. So they brought in a consultant from Gallup. We had taken our test. When you get the training, you get your full 34. And just for folks to know out there, apparently education is the industry that by far wants to know their full 34. versus other industries. So as you know, if you do take the test and you only pay, I think the $20, you only get your five. So I got access to my full 34, and it was just an out of body experience. I was really appreciating what was being said, and I got this hunger for more. And so I looked into what does it mean for me to do more, because it really focused on one to one, what they would call like coaching. And so I took a course that was funded by my department, thankfully, and it was more on like organizations, like dynamics, groups, and that was my bread and butter. And so, ironically, I got certified in February 2020, and I had this master plan that I was going to start a business, and then COVID happened literally 2 weeks later. So it's funny because it's been something I've always been passionate about, but it more so is showing up in my work and the way that I manage. I haven't yet kind of crossed over into being a full blown coach, but I am certified and I can do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I know my version of that, and I feel like we all, whether we want to revisit that part of the trauma or not, I'm just sort of like, what were your grand plans for 2020 that you were gonna, because yeah, like I was gonna like go out to like a bunch of conferences and stuff. Like I was like building momentum and like, kind of hustling on that end. But yeah, I mean, I guess just even the spirit of what you're saying, like the applicability of getting certified and doing all that, like just in terms of like the higher education world where that if nothing else would be sort of your day to day. It could be new student orientation starting, with that kind of transition, or student staff training, especially in residence life, and all that kind of stuff. So with all of that, to kind of just kind of really focus in on that point, like there's a lot of different things in the way that this could impact students. And I'll have a follow up too, I guess, if you can kind of start germinating on about like the impact that might have on staff members as well. But like starting, obviously, like so much of this would be hyper valuable to students as they're developing their identity and everything else. So just to kind of expand upon that, what is the impact of this approach on students?
Yeah. So I think for it to really have the impact that it needs to be more than just the inventory test that you mentioned. So I think it's what you do with that information once it's out there. And so once a student knows what they're talented at, making sure that they're reflecting on that. Because here's another thing: people will kind of want to compare answers and be like, "I'm also this. Like we must be the same person." That's not true. So doing some reflection on how that shows up in their work, and then making sure that that kind of shows up in their interactions with one another. So a lot of times in my own journey, I would one of my talents is I move very fast, and before I really had this awareness of strengths, I would work with folks that moved at a slower pace, and I would just get so frustrated, and I wouldn't understand like what is going on. And once I understood their strengths and realizing, I think the strength that they had was called intellection, which means they need time to ruminate, process. I was like, oh, you're not thinking of something, you're not moving slow, you just need time to kind of ruminate on stuff, where for me I'm already like running down the road, you know. So I think that's where it really has impact, is how can students interact with one another, to what you said before, you have that shared language and understand that perhaps we're just approaching this differently, and that's not a bad thing. And then hopefully, and when they seek employment or just other leadership opportunities, how are we placing people in the right spots? One thing that Gallup Strengths is very clear about is you don't want to use it for hiring. So you want to be very careful in saying we need someone who has communication in their top five. You want to be careful with that, because really it's just an indicator of how someone is going to approach things. But you can be a great communicator and not have communication in your top five. So it's not like, as much as folks want to say like it's like a typology test, like you want to be careful about labeling people, but it is like a great introduction to how someone values their time, how they show up. And then if we can do that for students, then I think we're going to see a greater sense of belonging and greater sense of connection to the institution. That's what we really want. We want students to come and stay at our institutions.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because I think like to that idea of like, okay, you can't just sort of have this like one to one, like we're looking for this person, so we need that strength, and if they don't have it, then they must not be good at it, and all that. Like, I have seen just a shifting of the top five, and then some just like totally dropping and new ones coming in, just depending on like where I am in my life. Like, sort of, it's almost like with the idea of strengths and like taking that as like a metaphor. It's like I'm just working out different parts of my body or what, like it, just the idea of like, oh, okay, like I'm still a student, or I'm in my first professional role, or I just moved, or I did whatever. Like that, I feel like all of those sort of, have an impact. So, It is good to not take it as sort of this like infallible, yeah, the idea is like, well, if it's not in their top five, then they are horrible at it. They're not good. Like it's like no, it's obviously yeah. It's the idea too that like having that full 34, it is the idea of like these are all the strengths that people could have. It's almost like these are all the different quadrants of muscles on your body. It's like we use all of them and they're all just going to be at different levels. It's not as if it's like, well, if they don't have it in their top five, then they don't have it at all. But, um, and I think, yeah, that's it's just that other point that you made of sort of like empathy. Like that's such a like kind of interesting sort of additional benefit of it. I think it was just sort of the going through the whole exercise, you would have empathy for people that have different strengths than you. So I think that is a really, really powerful thing. Um, and I guess, you're someone who like went through it as a staff member and kind of through that lens. So like whether it's just purely like you as a working professional getting benefit from that program, but or like if it's like the way that you work with students or work with other colleagues or whatever way you want to take this, but like what do you feel like the impact of this approach is on staff members themselves?
So I do think it parallels with students. I think a lot of times, especially in higher ed, like we're working on committees, we're working together. We are often not doing something alone. We're leading a team. And so I think that self-awareness first off about how am I wired? What am I naturally talented at? And then for me, I guess I'm a bit of an oddball because most of my talents, so the talents are grouped into four categories: relationship building, strategic thinking, influencing. Oh, and this is pretty bad. I'm forgetting the fourth. But what I will say is I am heavy in influencing, which is something you would more so see like in business or marketing. And so a lot of what I think about is I'm an extrovert. I get out there. I love to razzle dazzle the parents and the students. And so I would often build a team that complemented me. My team was a little bit more introspective, a little bit more critical thinking, ways to balance me out. And so I think with staff, it's a great way to understand like how can I complete what I may not be natural at, because that's the other thing. You're to your point about the full 34, the the folks would say that your 34th is never going to move up so significantly that you're going to like it's going to be in your top 10. So if I know that like empathy is my 34th and that's not something that I'm naturally talented at, perhaps I can kind of fill in the gaps so I can have representation and a more holistic thought process or approach to the work that we're doing. And so I think in management, I think in putting teams together, it really makes sense. But then also in supervision, going back to the point about like perception of one's abilities and how they approach stuff, I felt like once I started to have a deeper understanding in my training of strengths, the way I had conversations with folks that I supervised looked different. It wasn't like, hey, you missed this assignment. It was more so like, walk me through your day to day. Like, talk to me about your thought process. Like, what's important to you? What fills you with joy? There's a phrase that we talk about as coaches that says feeding your strengths. And more often than not, I found that I had people that were talented in areas where their strengths weren't being fed. In the work that they did as live-in staff, they weren't able to exercise what they found exciting. And so as a supervisor, I would kind of shift and think, how are ways that I can put them in this position? How can I feed that talent and strength so they feel a sense of belonging and a sense of purpose and value? And so I do think it parallels the students, but I think in a more mature way, it's about that sense of how can I actually do what I'm good at? So I feel like this is a place worth staying and that I'm safe and that I belong in.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's well said of just like anything that we've said, whatever, like if you have kind of all the quadrants of like students and like staff to students or like whatever direction the arrow is going of who is interacting with who, it's going to be like, greater empathy, like doing work that feels really affirming and sort of sets you up for success, whatever. Um, yeah. I mean, it just really, if you can help make sure people are equipping each of those lens whatever direction things are going in, like they're not having it almost just be completely self-serving, because it's like yes, that is a really great impact, like you better know yourself and all that, but it's like hopefully it is also allows you to like express greater empathy towards other people that have different strengths. But um so with all that being said, again, and we've talked about that, we've had exposure to this and sort of incorporated over like span of like over a decade. Is there something that you feel like makes this approach so important generally, and then maybe like especially at this moment, because I feel like the idea of coming out of an isolating pandemic and people, still earnestly kind of pursuing their academic and career goals and everything else. Like, do you feel like there's like something about this moment that makes this approach like especially important?
I think even before the pandemic, it's to the point that you were saying before about I think it's easier to digest what you're good at than like here's what you're not so great at. I think as human beings, we're naturally wired to want to improve what's not good, as opposed to really what Gallup would say is we need to maximize in our strengths. It's just not in our nature. And so even before the pandemic, I would say it's a great way to kind of get people in and get invested without being too worried about like, oh, once again, empathy's by 34th. How do I become more empathetic? But I would say post pandemic, we also need to look at like the workforce. I am a millennial and I am now what I guess you would say like a upper leader within my institution. I am working with Gen Z. When you look at like millennials and what they want, I think the thing that stuck out to me is millennials want constant feedback. They want to know how they're doing. My mom is a boomer and she made it clear to me that like if your boss didn't say anything to you, you knew you were good. And I was like, oh no, I need to ask my boss, how am I doing? How can I be better? And then you have Gen Z that is so connected through media. They want a purpose, they want something to matter, they want integrity and trust. I think it's really about having a platform to have these honest discussions where folks feel seen, where folks feel valued, and they don't feel bad for how they think. I think before, like I mentioned, when I was more immature, I would be upset with the person who didn't do things in the way that I thought that they should. Now those conversations are more about curiosity and help me understand. And I think those are much easier for folks to digest. And if we could have conversations more like that, I think our workplace, our environments would be more copacetic. Because another thing I'm sure we all know is Gen Z folks are very quick to want to change jobs if the vibe is not right. And so it's really about how do we have that vibe be more celebratory and focused on here's what you do great and let's put you in the right position, as opposed to you're not doing what I need you to do better. And I think pre-pandemic those conversations happen more about like I need you to do better, as opposed to like let's find how we can get you into a great spot.
Yeah, I think that's a good point where like I guess my takeaway, like one, I think it capitalizes what you're saying, sort of the nature of the tendency of like our generation as we're sort of like, uh as we got into the workforce and everything. But then it almost like I think allows more flexibility as time goes forward, like you said, of like that you can work with more empathy, work with more kind of an affirmative approach and everything versus before where it's just like the complete absence of anything where it's just like, well, that feels like fairly rigid. Like there's not any flexibility in like a, blank void, I get, so that idea that you could move this forward as, each generation keeps sort of like, kind of permeating the workforce, like it would just sort of trickle down and kind of just, everyone can kind of incorporate a perspective like this and give whoever is sort of coming up behind them or whatever else, kind of give them what they need. Uh, so yeah, so that makes me really excited. And that idea of like what's really important for this moment as like more people are wanting kind of this more deeper, constructive sort of work relationships and with their supervisors and different things like that. Like there's now just more great tools to do that. But so there's definitely a lot for this topic, a lot of information, stuff that people I'm sure can examine. But is there any sort of top resources or just advice or anything that you would recommend as we sort of start to wrap up?
I mean, I would say if you in your own journey didn't take the test, take it. Also, you mentioned something before that I love. I think there's two different camps of thought. The one time you take the test, it's the truest results versus I am in the camp of s- significant life moments will shift how your brain is wired. And so when you mentioned that you noticed kind of reshuffling, I have too. Like I took it as a graduate student and then like a first time full professional, perhaps you get married or what have you. Those things do rewire your brain. And so I would say take it if you're curious, and then just do some reflection. I think it's a great tool just to better understand yourself. And then if you love it, then do it amongst your team. I think it's once again easy to grasp because who doesn't like to talk about like what they're good at? And it's not to say that you can't talk about what you're not good at, but the focus isn't so much on like shame on us, we're not good at this. It's more so like how can we collectively work together, knowing that this is perhaps a blind spot for us on our team. And I just think those conversations are always easier. I'd also like to add throughout this conversation, I realized the fourth category, which is executing. And I say that because I actually have no talents in executing in my top 10. So that's probably why I didn't remember. But halfway through, I was like, oh, the final one is executing. And that doesn't mean I don't get stuff done, but I think the way in which I go about it looks different. And it's usually through influencing or relationship building. So,
Good. Yeah. It's a good save, like making sure because somebody like listens through is like, this guy doesn't even know. Yeah. Well, and yeah, I think that's like part of the idea of like people are going to be more intimately acquainted and knowledgeable of like their sort of like, their strengths and the categories and like adjacent ones or whatever versus just being like, yeah, it's hard for me to get my brain into how somebody with like completely sort of different strengths would, operate and everything. So yeah, I mean, it is definitely like that's like the initial seed to plant is like if you haven't taken it, take it, and then that can sort of blossom into like okay, you at least just kind of have a good shorthand for like operating in that way, and then like obviously some people pursue certifications and all these different things, but it's like that's obviously not required to just like be a human being who lives in the world that appreciates this, the spirit of what this is. um and yeah, I mean, I would absolutely believe because like as you're saying that of like kind of doubling down on like life events changing what your strengths might be. It's like yeah, and I've not taken it since I've become a father, and that's like I'm sure going to be a huge difference and stuff. So I'm past due, I think, for another inventory here, but so kind of segueing from that, I mean that's obviously like a big sort of professional focus for you and everything, but we like to just ask everybody like what attracted you to writing for Impact. I think some people had like familiarity with writing before and all that, but yeah, just curious like what made you take the leap.
yeah, so it's funny. It was a few things. So, I the cohort before me, I knew two of the four folks, and I was intrigued about having a different platform to express oneself. I had like early on in my professional development plan, like as a first year full time employee, I wanted to present at a conference or do something a little bit more scholarly, and it has yet to happen. I also feel like the conferences always happen like right after opening, so I always miss a deadline. So I was like, you know what, this would be a really cool way to be able to express myself, not necessarily in a scholarly way, but a more kind of like maybe commentary or just some advice or something that I think could speak to what folks are thinking about. Hopefully it's interesting. It doesn't hurt that there was these cool caricatures. That's what sealed the deal for me. So when I saw everyone's little caricatures, I was like, I got to do this because these are adorable. But for me, it's been great because I have a lot of thoughts and opinions, and it's been fun. It's almost like taking me back to graduate school where I can just reflect on now I've worked in the field for 10 to 11 years, then I can just talk about what I've experienced. And it's an opinion piece. So you can agree, you can disagree, but it's just cool to be able to kind of put out there for the masses just some different topics. So I've enjoyed it. I also am still figuring out what my next kind of career move will be. I've chosen to go back to school and I'm in an MBA program now, and I'm still very much serious about doing some coaching or consulting, but for higher ed. And so I saw this as an opportunity to get a different type of skill set in my wheelhouse where I could say, I've maybe talked about our field through more of an objective lens. And I would like to think that, in the consulting world, sometimes there is some writing of like objective, like here's this, here's that. So it's been fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very valuable exercise. Like I've done it, intermittently over, ever since like finishing grad school. So it is like, over 10 years and stuff. So, um, yeah, that way that you can distinguish yourself, putting yourself out there, get better at sort of connecting dots and putting ideas together in a way that's sort of palatable and understandable by an outside audience. And yeah, I mean, I think it is just a good muscle, to keep working, I guess, to keep that metaphor going. Yeah, I'm really glad that you felt inspired. I mean, that's kind of like part of it with like doing these interviews is like trying to just help more people feel inspired, and feel willing to kind of take that leap because it's the idea where like I kind of like have had periods where like I wrote a lot and kind of like burnt myself out on it, but then it's like I feel inspired after a while to come back to it. So it's like, yeah, whether you've never written for a like external publication, before or are just like ready to jump back in, it's like, yeah, we just like to hear kind of how people come to it. And I think we have certainly had a lot of people this cycle that are either had just finished or in the midst of some sort of like graduate or doctorate program. So it's like, hey, I'm going to be doing a lot of writing anyway, or like, at least should be able to like kind of share my work. So I think that that's kind of an interesting angle as well. But so we wrap up these just kind of these more informal interviews with folks on the blogging team, just sort of uh, talking about like what you're looking forward to. It sounds like you got a lot of cool stuff with the MBA program and all that and some of your other plans, but like whether it's sort of micro, like this academic year or, whatever way you want to take it, what are you looking forward to?
Yeah, I mean, I would just continue off that same vein. One of my top 10 is learner. I love to learn. And for quite some time, I've just not been able to exercise that talent. I feel like I've been a doer, especially with COVID. It's support students, it's fix problems. And it is so fun to be a learner again. So I am in a cohort. I am learning topics that I never thought that I would grasp. I'm actually doing pretty well, much to my surprise. And so I think what I'm excited to do is to kind of practice what I preach. And I'm now activating more of my talents than I have for some time. And I think I have a greater sense of joy these days. And so I'm excited to go along the ride. I just entered, so I don't graduate until 2025, but to see where that takes me, and what that new knowledge will kind of open my eyes to, whether they're opportunities or just ways of doing things. And so it's just ironic because I know that a lot of my joy is coming from a talent that has been kind of on the back burner for now, but now it's at the forefront.
Yeah, well, it's just been incubating and all that time and just sort of warming up, and now it is out in the world. And yeah, I mean, as part of it is like the journey, like the MBA journey, and then it's like, okay, then what happens afterward? It is kind of always that idea of like, okay, whenever you're a student, there's awesome things that happen in that process, and then you graduate, and it's like, well, this is just the beginning. This is like you get the whole vista opened up of it's like, I guess I'm like, I play video games. I'm thinking of it's like, oh, you just finished the prologue, and now you're sort of like you walk out, and it's like, cool, here's the whole open world game that you can play and do whatever you want. So yeah, it's really exciting. But well, we very much thank you for your service on the blogging team. I think the timing of these is like folks are starting to wrap up their year long commitment and everything, but. So folks can stay tuned. We'll hopefully reach out to the next batch of folks. I think we're going to start recruitment for here soon as the recording and posting this episode in December 2023. So keep an eye out for that. But really appreciate you taking some time out and hanging out and talking all about strengths.
Awesome. Thank you so much.